I'm Hareth Al Bustani. I'm the Arts and Culture Editor at The National. And in this session today, we're going to be discussing connecting and physical spaces. Specifically, we're going to be exploring our relationships with physical spaces, the ways in which we interact with them, and the ways in which we connect with one another through them. It strikes me as a particularly fascinating time and place to be having this conversation, not just because this country is a place where people from all over the world come and connect with one another, but because of our modern history and our future trajectory of rapid development and urbanization. And throughout all of this development, some of our relationships towards physical spaces haven't really changed that much. For example, when you look at our relationship with the Majlis, this has always been a space where we extend hospitality to our guests, where we receive hospitality, we forge friendships, share news. This is something that we still hold very valuable in our lives and will continue to do so. But at the same time, as our physical spaces around us change on a micro and macro level, there are other changes that we have to factor in. Fortunately, we're in a very unique position in this country where we still have enough space in our cities and our settlements where we can actually pursue visionary and utopian approaches towards master planning. We've already seen a lot of fascinating examples of that, and today we happen to be joined by one of the driving forces behind one of the most fascinating projects, which is Alserkal Avenue in the Alserkal district.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guests. We have Vilma Jurkute, the Executive Director at Alserkal Initiatives, which includes Alserkal Avenue, Alserkal Advisory, and Alserkal Arts Foundation. And James Law, founder and CEO of Cybertecture, architect, World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, and Justice of the Peace. Vilma has played a formative role in Dubai's Alserkal district, which isn't just a physical space, it's a community, and it's become a benchmark of what cultural districts can look like, not just in the region, but in the world. James, on the other hand, is the founder of Cybertecture, which is a design and build company known for producing groundbreaking projects in architecture, interior design, master planning, digital spaces, and much more. And James has always pursued a philosophy of orientating projects around serving people from all backgrounds. And so with that, James, I'd like you to, there's been so many dimensions to your work. You've worked across so many different scales. But could you please summarize, I think a lot of your work can be summarized through a couple of your projects, which we've discussed in the past. Could you tell us very briefly about your Technosphere, OPOD housing, and Satoshi Island projects, and what spatial needs they seek to address?
Thank you so very much for having me. So as an architect, and I hope as an architect of the future, we are very, very in tune with the fact that the world is changing very fast. And how we build this world, how we build the buildings, how we build the cities, need to be in tune with that change. And the pursuit of my own kind of design, which is called Cybertecture, has always been on this mission to try to discover the next kind of prototype that would really solve some of the problems that we all face on this planet collectively. And we as architects are hugely responsible for creating some of the structures and the organizations that hopefully can alleviate some of those problems. So thank you for highlighting some of our projects. On the bigger scale, we are very concerned with the city. Humanity is very conglomerated into cities, and the traditional way in which we've designed cities as urban spreads is something that we must question. So we've been creating a new kind of city, which is called a Technosphere, where units of 50,000 people live in a man-made planet placed on the ground, saving 50% of water, 40% of energy use, 30% less building materials going into the construction, but then at the same time opening up the landscape so that much of it can be preserved without the need to build highways and roads and car parks, because we will live and work differently. Another aspect that we are very concerned with is that today we have 7.8888 billion, I checked this morning, of people on this planet. And some large proportion of that population is really suffering from the lack of affordable housing. And we might think that the world has been improving on that, but we've actually been regressing on that. So as architects, how can we help to alleviate this? So we came up with an idea called the OPOD project, which is to conglomerate all of the new but spare concrete water pipes being manufactured all around the world and use a design where we can change them in a very short and low-cost way into housing. And those concrete water pipes are repurposed from the fact that they're water pipes into solid, safe, affordable housing for small numbers of people living inside them, but then they can be mass manufactured on scale anywhere in the world and deployed quickly. So it's using architecture once again as a technology for alleviating some form of suffering. Another form of project we have been looking at is the systems behind our living, our connectivity, our real estate. And our cities are really organized around a very old traditional way of land ownership, of residency, etc. Now, in this day and age of technology, of decentralization, of the blockchain, we have embarked on a project in the South Pacific to build an island which is truly operating on a decentralized way. It's called Satoshi Island. Currently under construction, it is an 800-acre island where all the people who reside on the island have citizenships which are in the form of tokens in the blockchain. And thereafter, they can own land, they can explore the island without being there through our metaverse digital twin of the island and create the utopia that they want to live together in. From building their own houses using modular architecture in the metaverse, that translates into really produced real modular architecture in our factories in China, shipped to the island. The island comes together eventually as a DAO that is co-curated, co-managed, co-led by the citizens of the island. It leads to a kind of prototype testing about not only designing the physicality of our spaces, but also in the intelligent systems that manifests in a higher level of management, higher level of culture, and higher level of co-creation that I think we are at the dawn of in architecture and the way in which we build cities. So those are the kind of works that we are really fascinated on. Thank you.
Thank you for going through that with us. And Vilma, of course, over your career, you've explored space and physical spaces in very different types of ways. I can imagine when you first began on the Alserkal project, not a lot of people really understood what the vision was for it. And since then, it has continued to grow and grow and grow. And I was wondering, could you please outline what the initial vision for the district was, how it's grown, how that vision has continued to grow over time, and what perhaps some of the most unexpected avenues of it have been?
So I'm not a fan of visions because I think the world is filled with unrealized visions, and some of these visions can hold you ransom in a world that is changing so rapidly, and that's what the morning sessions were really discussing. So I'm wary of planning and visions. I mean, we grew together with the city, we grew organically, and you know, I always say that Alserkal Avenue is not synonymous with the built environment. It's really who is in the district, who is shaping the community. We've been making culture for over a decade with more than 70 pioneers, homegrown industries in arts and culture. 98% of them were first-time businesses and first-time ideas. So these are really kind of homegrown projects that shaped and rewired the industries through very alternative and unconventional way of thinking. And so collectively today we produce more than 105 exhibitions annually. We attract more than 1 million visits. But of course, when we began, I mean, we are housed in an industrial area of the city, and you are this kind of a bit of a rebel, no? I mean, you go against planning and zoning, which was meant to be industrial, but then of course you have your artists and creatives who really take on that space and make it into something else and start a movement. And you know, Leo Castelli, a very well-known art dealer in the 70s who represented Rauschenberg and other famous artists, was once asked, how do you pick your artists? And he goes, I pick them not because they're good, but because they are leaders of a new movement. And so I really think that's what cultural communities are about. And it's a process, it's an attempt to create a home for communities that we serve, for the publics that we serve in the UAE and the region and internationally. And even if you fail at that attempt, it's the attempt that matters. And I truly believe that art and culture can lead to social transformation. And we talk a lot about sustainability, and we are still focused on old definitions, dated definitions of sustainability, which is comprised of environmental, social, and economic spectrums. But I argue that culture should not be an afterthought. It should be the fourth pillar of sustainability. So I really think it's time to redefine and kind of rethink some of these myopic paradigms and definitions that in some ways we all helped create. But I really believe that cultural district is more than a physical space. And even when you speak of cities, James, I absolutely agree. I think the question today, we talk so much about placemaking, but we don't ask, are we place breaking with some of the policies and some of the decisions that we take? Are we making cities or we are unmaking cities? You know, these are the questions that we should really be asking when we think about space. And it's dangerous to define physical space without considering the urban metabolism and the flows. You know, we should be asking, where does our water come from? Where does our waste go? And where our publics live and how we live, and who is our community? Whom are we speaking with? Who are we becoming with? These are the questions that I think are really important, and I really want to congratulate the National and my friend and colleague Mina, who really brought different disciplines on stage to discuss this, that culture was not forgotten, because usually culture somehow does not appear in forums like this. So I'm really glad that we are here to talk about the role of culture in this context.
And earlier, we discussed the importance of networking, and particularly in the realm of culture and creativity, that can be so difficult. People can so easily become kind of trapped in their own little spaces. And I think that's a testament to the importance of cultural districts, where people can not just have spaces to show their works and sell their works, but actually network and come together and build these communities. But you touched on an interesting point of planning out cities. And I wonder how, in both of your perspectives, how do you approach master planning in a way that responds to the unique needs and makeups of the individuals and the communities that are being served? Because obviously there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So what do you think are some of the key considerations?
I think we talked a lot about shifting our mindset. I think number one is we need to begin focusing on economies of repair. So it's a luxury to be building something new. You know, everything is built with a 5-year plan, calculated on return on investment. So it's grounded in short-termism and commodified thinking. And the biggest thing is that we actually need to take a step away from wholesale thinking into wholesome thinking. And that addiction to growth and progress really needs to shift to thinking of economies of repair. So how do we repair and how do we unbuild? And this is a very complex and more difficult path to choose because the infrastructure has not been developed yet to accommodate that. But even we at Alserkal, I mean, to build a solar power infrastructure, to do kind of basic elements to rethink our public space. These were all long-term projects, and today we're leading a global co-commission across 3 continents in partnership with Global Cultural Districts Network, where for the first time we're asking what is the role and what does even public art looks like in non-Western contexts. And how do we audit the CO2 emissions of public art? So responsibility is not arbitrary, no matter which institution or industry you come from. We all are living in the world of Anthropocene, and we all need to make change in practice. And that's, of course, a harder path to choose. But I think when it comes to master planning, we just need to be thinking of all those elements and have all disciplines at the same table. And stop looking at plans from top down. I mean, go on the ground and see who are the people who live there and which communities are near and which communities are far. Because it's about cognitive distance. It's about the element of publicness. And as Alserkal, what was always important for us is that people from all walks of life are welcome in that non-transactional space where they can feel at home, where they belong. I think a sense of belonging is the most important metric, and perhaps we need to revisit our measure of success because currently economics is still number 1. And that pressure on cultural institutions makes it very difficult to focus on environmental or social or cultural elements. So perhaps that would be some of my preliminary thoughts on this.
And James,
Yeah, I mean, everything you say there is spot on. And maybe I can just respond by saying, when we have the opportunity to do a master plan, we feel it is a great responsibility. And the master plan, I think, traditionally used to be this kind of, master layout that seems to have gotten everything right, but it always gets everything wrong. So the kind of processes that we now go through to create a master plan is one where we really focus on narrative. So to have a narrative behind the master plan, to have a story, because as people begin to live the lives individually or as a community in the master plan, if there is a narrative, it means that the master plan will continue to grow, to evolve, and to have a life of its own. So how we do this now is when we have an opportunity, we actually try to expand on the narrative side of it by using AI. We actually curate the narrative by using the help of AI to expand the brief of a master plan. So normally we get a master plan that houses 1 million people and it has to have this and that and that. But without the narrative behind it, it is hard to be confident that the future people living in this city will know the meaning behind why they're there, that what is the quality of life that they can have, and subsequently, as they age, as they live their lives, how they can contribute to that narrative. So it's a much more higher level master planning than I think traditionally we as architects used to do, which is just to draw the plan. Now it's a bit like what Vilma's done at Alserkal. I'm a big fan of your location. We've been traveling there since its inception, and we've seen it grow. And that connection between people in that physical space has been driven by a narrative. And the narrative, I think, is the powerful DNA that can power some of these master plans of the future in a much more beautiful, humanistic way that we didn't really used to do so well in the past.
and both of you as well have a lot of experience working across complex networks of partnerships. For example, Alserkal is a crucial part of the Dubai Creative Zone. and there's a public element there, and you've worked in a lot of public spaces as well. And could you explain what kind of, when you're working on such large projects, such expensive projects, and such complex projects, what kind of partnerships are involved? And how do you construct those partnerships in a way that is able to deliver dynamic, engaging, and functional public spaces?
Well, I mean, in today's world, you cannot do anything alone. And a big part of our success has been municipal diplomacy. We grew together with the city. The only reason Alserkal has become what it has become, or what it will become, is because we are in Dubai, we are part of the UAE. There is a much bigger vision for the nation, for the city, and then of course at the neighborhood level too. And so it's a constant negotiation with people and place. It's a process. I think that's what I'm trying to say, that when you speak only of physicality dimension of space, you tend to lose the aspect that it's not static. It's a space and time, and it's a constant process. And so that process involves various stakeholders, and we've been very fortunate to have the support of the government and our community and our partners. And it's really a negotiation on a daily basis in collectively thinking together, because the environment continues to change, our objectives continue to evolve, and so you have to readapt. It's a very non-linear process. And so I think in a way you are a process, you are a producer, you are a reproducer, and it's kind of this motion. And so these partnerships and relationships are very, very important and crucial, but they're also very important with your own public. So for me, we always did it to serve our communities, very diverse communities of the city, just because of what Dubai has become. It's, we house 200 nationalities, and it's a transient space, but it's also a space where many people made their home. Jane Jacobs said that a city must stay forever young. And so the UAE is that place of flow of ideas and people and movement, and that keeps this place young, that keeps this place in a way that you resonate and you're speaking with your audiences. And so Alserkal has become what it has become because of this wider environment. We do not operate in isolation. We operate in collaborative spirit.
So, I think co-creation is extremely important in the partnership structures of ever complex projects. And in fact, they don't have to be just the large projects. The small projects also deserve that kind of co-creation. But I think in the 21st century, as we face increasingly rapid change behind these projects, the question is, what are the partners' roles? And I think the partners' roles are not just at the inception of the project. It is a continuing life force behind the project. So as an example, again, back to our crypto island in Satoshi Island. At the inception, we invited and recruited 24,000 partners to join our digital community. So they are all citizens of the island. And thereafter, even before the first designs were made on actually what the island should have, we created a DAO, so the decentralized autonomous organization. And everybody has an active participant role in that DAO, talking about public space, talking about communities, talking about sustainability, etc. And it is a constant reiteration of the design that comes out of this active participation, which we will hope will continue as new people come to the island, join this community. And I think in some ways the wisdom that we all want to impart into our projects cannot come from a very kind of strict, singular approach, but really now embrace on the full fabric of society, different thoughts, different ideas, different personalities, but bring it together with a kind of technological platform that allows all of that to be synthesized into the design concepts that constantly also has to be changed in creating these projects. So it's a really, really, I think, exciting new era of co-designing, not just at the beginning, but throughout the entire life of a project.
If I may add just what you mentioned about small projects, I think it's time to embrace smallness. And Jennifer Robinson has written a lot around ordinary cities, because we're so hung up on becoming global and seeking that validity. But actually, really, the next stage is thinking, how can we be more humble when it comes to architecture, when it comes to the way we build, the way we think, the way we shape community, and the way we repair. And I think when it comes to partnerships, what's really important is that we transcend those boundaries. I mean, I always say we have to look at where boundaries meet rather than separate. And that's really, really important, because if we come to the table with that kind of thinking, you're there to reach some sort of consensus, some sort of collective vision, like you said, to co-think together, rather than, meet someone's agenda. And so I think that's really important, that kind of thinking and notion for partnerships.
And something you just touched on earlier is this, one of the fastest developing spheres here is the rise of digital spaces and virtual spaces and the metaverse. In the cultural world, we've covered quite a few interesting examples where there might be a physical exhibition that is then, where the works are then later exhibited in the metaverse. But there's so many different applications, and it's continuing to grow and it's continuing to develop. What do you think are some of the ways that this growing digital space is affecting the ways in which we see physical space or space in general? And how important, as we continue to move into the digital space, is it that we stay grounded in physical spaces?
So I have a stab at that first, because that's right to the heart of my concerns. I think the fact is that the arrival of digital space as a duality to our everyday conscious real space is something that will no longer be alien to us. I think, whether we're looking on our phones, whether we are watching a movie, whether we are enjoying an immersive experience in the metaverse, that duality has arrived. The question really is that it could open a lot of opportunities, but then also can create a lot of problems for us. Now, the opportunities are vast because you can bring the billions of people together into one space, can share the experience together, can communicate at a kind of fidelity which, traditionally we can't unless we take an aeroplane somewhere, and we have to do all of that in order to make our networks more vibrant. That's all great, and unlimited creativity in terms of scale of artworks in the metaverse, to incredible superpowers you can have in the metaverse, which are all, I think, innately very attractive to all of us. But that duality also has a danger, where the friction between the virtual and the real becomes something of a problem for us. Now, what is that? So as we move ahead, issues with AI, issues with deep fake, issues with not being able to differentiate anymore what is real and what is unreal is an immense danger facing humanity. For us to be truly happy, are we just being stimulated to be happy, or are we really happy in the space? That's a really big question. And so, one of the things that I think we often get too enamored with as people is these whole breakthroughs, we can go into the metaverse, etc. That's very great. But we must also stay grounded. And actually, I spoke to you previously about this idea that I should say something that I think really brings some insight to this conference. And I came up with this idea that unless we still have physical space, unless we do meet together in a hall like this, unless we are able to verify what we know digitally of each other. So we can know each other through LinkedIn, we can know each other through Zoom, but that today we are all together here physically on this stage, and we just check, oh, Vilma, you really are Vilma. And then, you are who you really are, and you are really as stylish as you are. Then we will never be able to verify. We will never be able to verify what is real and unreal. So great opportunities in that duality between the virtual and the real space. However, the friction between the two is something that we must navigate, we must regulate, we must be cautious about. Because perhaps God never really intended human beings to exist in two worlds. But that we have the technology and the know-how to do so gives us opportunities, but also gives us a great risk. So that's something that I'm very concerned about.
I think today we need places of meaning and culture more than ever before. There's a lot of conversation and divide between the digital and the physical, and then the kind of phygital of it. But I mean, Gerard Delanty has written a lot about community and the definition of community academically. And he kind of said that distinction doesn't really matter because all communities at some point have been imagined, whether they're physical or digital. But what I want to kind of maybe draw attention to when we think about these two formats, and it's something I spent a lot of time thinking during COVID, the kind of global paralysis, was the commons. So going back to the meaning of the commons, and what is the role of culture in public space, and what does it mean for the digital commons? Because that's really important. We don't spend enough time talking about it. But the digital commons kind of don't exist. I mean, it's already owned. It's commodified in the same ways that physical space has been. We don't even intend to investigate much. The spaces we believe are public are usually owned by big conglomerates or corporates. And so we need to investigate and protect this ownership and really think diligently about what does digital commons mean today and what will it look like, what it should look like, and how we're going to protect it and guard it. That's something that I think is really important for us to be thinking about.
I'd now like to take a moment to open the session up to our audience and take some questions from the floor. So if anyone has any questions, could you please raise your hand? Yes, please, Mina.
You must have answered everything. I see more familiar faces. I expect they would raise their hand.
I wanted to go to the point, Vilma, that you said about making sure that we're thinking about the space that we're in when you're creating community and not thinking about it in a modified manner. But at the same time, economics are realities. And so the same, James, when you're describing this new island that you're putting together and citizens through tokens, but there's also an economic value that's necessary to make things happen. And so how do you make sure that it is economically viable? Because we still have to make sure it's economically viable. Sure. But also, how do you balance the short-term, immediate, when you launch something, and the long-term return?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think to start with, it has to be grounded in long-term thinking. And what I meant when I said that, it's not to ignore the economics. But I think at the moment, economics wins. sustainability element, it's a constant negotiation between environmental, political, social, economic spectrums. But what happens is that economic just takes 90%, and the rest almost get nothing. So I think my question was, in that aspect of more kind of circular economies and economies of repair, how do we divide it across the three or across the four, whichever way we imagine or design or model our own organizations or concepts or neighborhoods. And it was the same with Alserkal Avenue. I mean, it's a self-sustaining organization. It does not require funding to exist. But what was really important is that the way we created this neighborhood, where we support through partnerships or grants a new generation of thinkers and ideas, so that they have a space to realize those ideas. And while those who are established and want to be part of the community actually compensate that. So these are the, it's like I just think it's how we redesign, and we were lucky that we are founded by the Alserkal family, who, were not seeking economic gain from the project. And I think that allowed it to really create that very different model for what a neighborhood or a cultural district could look like. So certainly not ignoring economics, it's a very important pillar, but trying to balance it out in a more pragmatic way that allows for social and environmental to play a role because of anthropocenic challenges that we are collectively facing. So I think that's the intent.
Yeah, it's a real world problem we face every day, right?
Sure.
To pay our bills and make sure things are moving along. I think we have to be realistic. I mean, on every project, at its inception, involves a huge amounts of capital to get it started. So you do need to have that roadmap. You do need to have some rules in place or some protocols in place where there is some economic return. However, I'm just speculating a little bit that as long as that engine has been started, that engine may not have to be maintained in the same way. So what I'm saying is that, a lot of projects could become economically unviable later, but then be sustainable at the same time, in the sense that when you get the community up to a critical mass, there is an economics within. The so-called traditional economics of needing to have money to do trading, to buy food, to pay for the electricity might change because your house is generating the electricity now. The food you buy is you're trading the tomatoes that you are growing in your garden with the lettuce that's been grown by your neighbor. And that's also an economics of a new age. I mean, it sounds like we go backwards, but we can also go forwards. But very true, Mina, what you say is many projects when we start, because we are moving still very slowly from the traditional economic system, involves a lot of capital. And you need to give those investors a sense of return. But then again, I think it's not something that has to last forever. It can, once it gets to a certain critical mass of reaction, hopefully it can work more sustainably and therefore have a greater positive impact on the community. So I'm answering a bit on both sides. We need the money, but then let's not just focus on the money in the long term.
Let's not be greedy, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's the...
Not to be greedy.
Not to be greedy.
Monsieur, the thing is, your firm has been quite unique and has always been celebrated as quite unique because it's focused on a more holistic philosophy of not just creating amazing projects and generating profits, but actually creating projects that respond to people's needs, that actually consider the various needs of all members of society. Is that something that you find is still unique in the industry? Is that something that you see changing? And if not, how do we change that going forward?
I certainly don't think it's unique. I think, as you can see from the audience here, everybody is caring about the future. And so we are engaging with each other, putting efforts into thinking about how to do a better future. So I don't think we're unique in that way. But I think more or less our reason for existing within our philosophy is this immense belief that since we should be grateful for every opportunity and time we have on our planet, that every project that we design and build is an agent of change, that every step we make is creating ripples in destiny, or whatever you want to describe it to be. So the God-given abilities that we have as individual and as a team, as a company, we want to apply them hopefully in the most holistic and positive way. And that whatever we do is not ours. Whatever we do is for the world and has both positive and negative impacts. So let's do our absolute best to try to use our creativity, our innovation, our courage, our experience to not make the same mistakes as before, but ultimately to alleviate the suffering that we all feel every day on this planet. And only by that learning and progress do I believe that design has a value to be pursued. So that's what drives us.
Can I ask both of you, do you recall a space when you really look back, the space where that really kind of first started making you think about spaces and spaces as a place of connectivity and kind of wanting to pursue that further?
So I grew up in Hong Kong, and for those of you who've been to Hong Kong, we are extremely busy, extremely dense, extremely expensive place now. And I think throughout my life, but also recently in my career, I've visited and spent time with people in our city that were very disenfranchised by the rising costs, by having to live in extremely tiny spaces that were bordering on inhumane. And my mission and my purpose as an architect was strengthened every time I saw that, because I was proud of my city, I was proud of Hong Kong, I was proud of China, but we can also see the byproducts of all of those progress was also leaving behind serious problems of space for many, many people. So that constantly makes me think about, are we doing it in the right way? Do we need to change direction? And what should the future really be like in order to avoid these problems again? So that's what drives me when I visit those spaces.
For me, I think it's not about the space, but the role of culture and public art in transforming that space that really drives our work and is a huge part of our mission, really. And, you know, in Alserkal, we don't even have traditional signage. I mean, we commissioned Mary Ellen Carroll, from an artist based in New York years ago, and she created this work in 2016 titled The Circle Game, and the 2 LED signs that greet you when you arrive says, when did you arrive and when will you return? And these were the 2 questions that you can pose to the city of Dubai because of how rapidly it grew as a city, but also to the people of the city. And it was meant to be an ephemeral work, and it became a permanent work. It became part of Alserkal's identity. And for many people, it's one thing that they always take a photo of, then they come back, then they return. It became part of place. And they have a relationship with that work, and there is a meaning attached to it. And then I conducted my own research at Oxford, asking that very question: what is the role of cultural districts in shaping a sense of belonging in young adults? The kind of stories that I heard for young people, how they connect through culture, in ethnicity and sexuality, and find that sense of belonging in a very troubled world, was fascinating. And so it does come with a really great responsibility. I think that's the kind of closing message, that responsibility is not arbitrary, and the kind of work that we do is important, and most of the time invisible. And that's okay, because we can never measure the kind of sense of belonging that we are creating. You can only see it in attendance and feedback that you get as a cultural institution.